Welcome back to Half the Battle. I'm your host, as always, Daniel Levi, and Brandon Moreno just went out there and defeated Steve Erceg via unanimous decision, 49-46 times 3. All 3 judges agreed that he won 4 of the 5 rounds, and it was just a very mature performance by Moreno. Clearly showed the experience gap, which was a big talking point going into this fight. You know, I felt like Erceg, although he's a very talented fighter and he handled his first 3 UFC opponents accordingly, he was simply put in a position he wasn't ready for that title fight against Pantoja. And then, like I mentioned, he never got a rebound fight. His next fight after Pantoja is Kai Kara France, and then Brandon Moreno in Mexico. It's like, dude, you go from fighting David Dvorak, Alessandro Costa, and Matt Schnell, who are, fine top 30 level fighters, but you go from them to all of a sudden you're fighting the champ in Brazil. You're fighting Kai Kara France, a top 3 guy down under. You're fighting Brandon Moreno, the future Hall of Famer, in Mexico City. It's like Steve Erceg truly bit off more than he can chew. And I feel for the guy because he is a good fighter. Listen, if he was some bum, Pantoja and Moreno would have disposed of this man easily. Now, they both outclassed him and clearly won their fights, despite what anyone says, because I know for whatever reason, people try to act like, although Erceg did win a round in that Pantoja fight, people completely overblow the success he had and almost try to sound like he arguably won that fight. That is ultra fake news. And then last night, thank God no one was doing that on Twitter, but I look at the stats. You go to UFCstats.com and they're saying Erceg outstruck Moreno in significant strikes, 116 to 89. That's more BS. I don't buy that. I saw the fight with my own 2 eyes. Erceg did not outstrike anything. Erceg maybe threw more, but he did not land more, right? And Moreno, he did a very good job changing up the levels and disguising that leaping left hook. Got 1 takedown along the way and just went out there and outclassed Steve Erceg. So what's next for both of them? Well, as far as Brandon Moreno is concerned, when you look at the rankings, right, he's already fought the champion Pantoja more than once. He's fought the number 1 contender, Brandon Royval, more than once. And he's literally fought everybody in the top 5 except Tatsuro Taira. And then, of course, there's Manel Kape, but I think Manel Kape's about to get the title shot. So you could do Moreno versus Taira. I think Moreno versus Taira or Moreno versus Tagir Ulanbekov. Those are, I think, the only options. I just don't see him getting a title shot unless Kape beats Pantoja. Then you got a fresh matchup with Kape and Moreno. But if Pantoja remains the champion, no one wants to see the quadrilogy when Moreno's down 3-0 in that one, right? So it's gonna have to be Taira or Tagir, or wait for the title shot. And if Kape wins, maybe Kape versus Moreno. Now for Erceg, hey, we got to take a big step back. We got to take a big step back in competition, and that's okay. Let this guy get a nice little tune-up fight, man. But the thing about it is when you're ranked in the top 10, there aren't too many tune-up fights. But how about Asu Almabayev? I think that's a good matchup for Steve Erceg and will really test where both guys are at in their respective careers. Asu Almabayev coming off the loss to Manel Kape and Steve Erceg last night to Brandon Moreno. So I think that's the fight to make. Steve Erceg versus Asu Almabayev. I would say Tim Elliott, but I'd love my boy Cody Durden to get that Tim Elliott fight. So, yeah, I'm going to go with that. But listen, man, you got to be careful because, even though we want to give Steve Erceg a step down in competition just to get his confidence back and let him know he still belongs, some of these guys in the top 15 are straight up killers. Ramazan Temirov, Josh Van. I'm not convinced Steve Erceg beats either of those guys. So you got to be very careful how you match him up. And I think Asu Almabayev or Alex Perez, something like that is the direction you go in with Steve Erceg. But for the future Hall of Famer, Brandon Moreno got his first win in Mexico under the UFC banner. And, you could see how much it meant to him. Great moment, good performance, and I look forward to seeing what's next. Now, Manuel Loco Torres went out there and knocked out Drew Dober in the first round, which one doesn't simply do. Drew Dober is known for having one of the most iron chins and just insane durability that we've seen in all our years watching the sport. But when you're a veteran of over 40 pro fights, there's only so much you can take. And let me tell you this, Manuel Torres has 16 wins, 15 of them are finishes, and 8 of those finishes are knockouts. And he just went out there and knocked out the man tied for the most knockouts in UFC lightweight history, and that's Drew Dober. And Drew Dober and Dustin Poirier are currently tied for most knockouts in UFC lightweight history. Now, overall, Dustin Poirier has more UFC knockouts than Drew Dober because Dustin Poirier used to fight at 145 pounds. He got a bunch of knockouts there. But at 155, Dustin Poirier and Drew Dober are tied for the KO King and in the lightweight division. And Manuel Loco Torres just knocked out the UFC lightweight KO King. So Manuel Torres, hey man, you're 4-1 in the UFC. Your only setback is against Ignacio Bahamondes, who's in the top 15 currently. I want to see another exciting fight with Manuel Torres because every Manuel Loco Torres fight is an exciting fight. So I'm thinking something like Manuel Torres versus Chris Padilla. This kid Chris Padilla is 3-0 in the UFC. He's been doing his thing. And just coming off a split decision against Jai Herbert in London. How about Chris Padilla versus Manuel Loco Torres? 4-1 versus 3-0 in the UFC. I think that's the fight to make. But if you want to get Manuel Torres closer to the rankings, you could always do Manuel Torres versus Matt Frivola. Is that something y'all would be interested in? Or if you kind of want to do a striker versus grappler dynamic, another option I have is Manuel Torres versus Claudio Puelles. So those are the three options here. Manuel Torres versus Matt Frivola, Manuel Torres versus Chris Padilla, or Manuel Torres versus Claudio Puelles. Tell me which one of those y'all like the best. Now, as far as Drew Dober is concerned, man, this guy is a legend of the sport. He's got such a great attitude. All his fights are so exciting. He always brings it, win, lose, or draw. But he's at a point right now where he's just going to have to be testing these up and coming prospects, or he's going to have to be in a vet versus vet showdown. So if we do a vet versus vet showdown, you know, some highly experienced guys that Drew Dober still hasn't fought yet are Michael Johnson, Jim Miller, Jared Gordon, you know, stuff like that. But if you want to test an up and coming prospect against Drew Dober, which is what they've been doing lately, you know, they put Gian Silva and Manuel Torres back to back against him. I think you can go in a direction like Daniel Zellhuber versus Drew Dober, Esteban Ribovics versus Drew Dober. Tell me that those two fights would not be absolute chaos and just A1 matchmaking. So, yeah, you either do Drew Dober versus established vets, you know, like the Michael Johnsons and whatnot, or you put him up against young, up-and-coming, hungry killers like Daniel Zellhuber or Esteban Ribovics. Now, unfortunately, the Kelvin Gastelum versus Joe Pyfer fight got canceled. Man, I was looking forward to that so much. That was like my main event, you know. A lot of heat going into that fight, especially with the stunt Kelvin pulled his last fight against D-Rod, you know, where it was supposed to be an 170-pound fight, and he lets the UFC and his opponent know the day before weigh-ins that, actually, I'm going to have to fight at 185. Then he wins the fight, and then they try to, I don't know for a fact, but it seemed like they tried to punish him by giving him the biggest middleweight on the roster. But Joe Pyfer then gets sick in Mexico. If you've ever been to Mexico and you've gotten sick, you know exactly what Joe Pyfer went through, man. If you just drink that water there, I mean, listen, the drinking water in Mexico, you got to boil that shit. You don't just fucking drink it out the sink. Like, are you crazy? So, yeah, it sucks for Joe Pyfer. Hopefully he makes a quick recovery, but he stated he wants to see Kelvin in the next few weeks. So hopefully Mick Maynard's interested. Now, the thing about that is Kelvin made weight this time. Is Kelvin going to be able to, you know, ease off the tacos, you know, throughout the remainder of his stay in Mexico and be able to turn around in a couple of weeks and make weight? We'll find out. Now, Edgar Chairez had an absolutely incredible performance and a career-defining finish and win against CJ Vergara in the featured bout. And Edgar Chairez, he dedicated it to his family. I believe his uncle sold his truck so that he could help Edgar Chairez pay for, you know, training expenses and whatnot. I think that was the story. Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but either way, it was very heartwarming. And I think his uncle passed, so he dedicated this fight to him. And, you know, you could see the emotion coming out of Edgar Chairez. And man, Edgar Chairez knows how to weight cut, bro, because when he was in there, you could see the size difference. That dude ain't no 125er. I mean, I say that, but let's be very clear. You know, people like to call guys that are huge for their weight classes weight bullies. I think you're a weight bully if you miss weight. If you make the weight, you're not a weight bully in my book. So Edgar Chairez, although he's the biggest flyweight on the roster, he was a weight bully when he came in at 130 for one of those fights. But for this one against Vergara, he came in at 126. That is not a weight bully. He made the weight. But man, I feel like there's only so long he's going to be able to keep making flyweight. He's going to have to move up the bantamweight. But while he can make flyweight, this guy is physical. This guy is dangerous. He hits hard. He's experienced. He's paid dues. So I look forward to a lot of exciting fights with Edgar Chairez. How about Edgar Chairez versus Charles Johnson? What do y'all think about that? Edgar Chairez versus Charles Johnson? Is that the fight to make? I think that's a banger. So book it. And for CJ Vergara, I would not be surprised if that was his last UFC fight. But if not, I look forward to many more fun brawls with CJ Vergara. He always brings it, win, lose, or draw. But last night belonged to Edgar Chairez. I was happy to see him get that bonus. And let's put him in there with Charles Johnson. He's ready for that test. Now, Raul Rosas Jr. went out there and defeated Vince Morales via unanimous decision. And it was a typical Vince Morales fight where it's like he had moments in the fight where it looked like, oh, shit, you know, like a couple of those chokes, a couple little slight adjustments, and you could have finished the fight. But this is the issue with Vince Morales. It's he never does enough in the key crucial moments to win fights. And that's why he's on that skid, even though he clearly belongs in the UFC. Like Vince Morales, I feel like you put him right back in the regional scene, he's going to start winning fights again. But at the UFC level, man, this is truly a game of inches. But it sucks because he's not getting like blown out the water or anything. He's competing with these guys. It's just he's just a step behind. I feel for Vince because he clearly belongs. But for Raul Rosas Jr., 20 years old, the youngest guy on the roster, I feel like he proved a lot, man. He went 3 hard rounds in the Mexico City elevation with a seriously seasoned vet, showed off all elements of his game. And Raul Rosa said he wants someone in the top 15. Now, that might be biting off more than he can chew. However, I think I found 4 guys in the top 15 that he can compete with. Tell me what y'all think. Raul Rosas versus Marlon Chito Vera, Raul Rosas versus Kyler Phillips, Raul Rosas versus Ayman Zahabi, and Raul Rosas versus Marcus McGee. I mean, I don't think that those fights are unrealistic, but if he needs to take a few more, you know, if they want to wait till he's 21 to 23 to start testing himself against, you know, ranked opposition, that's fine. But like, he looked wise beyond his years to me last night, and I would not be opposed to seeing him in there with some of the ranked opposition that I suggested. So David Martinez, the surgeon, makes his UFC debut against Simon Oliveira, gets the first round finish. And firstly, we got to change this guy's nickname. What was it? The Black Spartan or something? Like what, dude? Like it should be the surgeon, the doctor, something like that. But listen, man, I felt happy for the guy. He's kind of has that new school point fighting style where kind of like that Lone Kavanaugh where they point fight, but everything they throw is hard. And as a result, he was able to go out there, find his timing, just outland, outclass, and knock out Simon Oliveira. I feel for Simon because when he first came into the UFC a few years ago, I thought that he was going to be one of these Brazilian vets, you know, win some, lose some, but have an honest, tough fight every time. And it just simply hasn't panned out. And that's how it goes sometimes at this level. So that's probably it for Simon Oliveira's UFC run. But for David Martinez, the sky's the limit. I mean, what can this guy not do? For real. Now, Kevin Borjas got a big upset in Mexico City by defeating Ronaldo Lazy Boy Rodriguez. Now, I was very entertained with this fight. I thought it was one of the most entertaining fights of the night. And even though Lazy Boy lost the fight, clearly lost the fight, I thought that he showed a lot of toughness. I thought that he showed a lot of grit, and he goes forward. He seems unfazed. Even when he gets dropped, the guy's unfazed. He just gets back up. He does a little backwards roll, gets back up, and signals you to come forward. Like, I like Ronaldo Lazy Boy Rodriguez. I just think that obviously he's got to shore up certain things with the defense. But as far as is he a real fighter or not, hell yeah, he is. And for Borjas, you got to feel good for the guy because, man, he looked great on Contender Series, but in the UFC, he's had tough matchup after tough matchup, right? He had to fight Josh Van in his debut. Then he fought Alessandro Costa. So it was nice to see him go out there and get that first UFC win. Now you get to stay on the roster. You truly belong. And very good counter striking by Kevin Borjas. That was his key and his path to victory against Ronaldo Lazy Boy Rodriguez. So I look forward to seeing both of them matched up in some more bangers because that's what both of these two bring to the table. And we'll see what the UFC matchmakers have in mind for them next. Now, Ateva Goudier, is it Goudier or is it Goat-Tier? He went out there and smoked the very durable Jose Daniel Medina. Now, everyone was talking about how Medina has elite durability, can't be knocked out, all this stuff. Well, that was proven wrong. He can be knocked out. And Gautier went out there, wasted no time, just got right after Medina. Big combination, finishes it up with a knee. And let's see what they do next with him. So we're talking about the middleweight division. I mean, you know what we do with our up and coming prospects at middleweight? We give them Dusko Todorovic, we give him matchups like that. We give him what about Ateba Goudier versus the kid that just fought Christian Leroy Duncan? That may be kind of an awkward matchup for him, but pulling up the roster right now, Ateba Goudier versus Zachary Reese, Ateba Goudier versus Marco Tulio or Trayshawn Gore, the winner of that. You could hook him up with the guy that they hooked my boy Mansour Abdul Malik with, that Nick Klein guy. Yeah, let Gautier go knock out Nick Klein real quick. So there's lots of options for the young, hungry African prospect. So I look forward to seeing what he does next. Now, Melquizael Costa went out there and defeated Christian Rodriguez in Mexico. And man, such a feel-good moment for Melquizael Costa. He's starting to really find his footing in the UFC. He's starting to get some momentum. And you always got to feel happy for a guy that is so seasoned, really paid his dues outside the UFC, came into the UFC, and it wasn't all bright skies as soon as he got here. He also had to pay dues in the big show too, and now he's finally starting to reap the rewards and got a massive victory against the surging Christian Rodriguez. And for Christian Rodriguez, he's still young, he's still a kid, he still needs to figure some things out. But let me tell you this, if you're an undefeated prospect fighting Christian Rodriguez, get ready to lose your O. Like I said on the preview show, Christian Rodriguez does his best work in the underdog role against guys that are less experienced than him. But when he goes up there against some vets, that's when he did lose that fight last night against Melquizael Costa, or even the Julian Erosa fight. So he struggled against these vets, but he does really good against undefeated prospects. Who's another undefeated featherweight prospect? Let me pull up the roster. Ooh, Hyder Emil. What about Hyder Emil versus Christian Rodriguez? That's a good fight. You could also do Felipe Lima versus Christian Rodriguez, or Myron Santos versus Christian Rodriguez. So there's lots of options in the direction we can go in with Christian Rodriguez. What do y'all think about those matchups? Just keep him as a prospect tester. And then one day he can become a contender himself. He's still young. I think people forget that. But right now, he does his best work in the underdog role against hot prospects. And for Mel Costa, I think it's time for a, not a top 15 showdown, but like a top 20 showdown, like the kind of showdown where the winner gets a top 15 matchup. I'm thinking something like Melquizael Costa versus Doo Ho Choi, right? Something like that. Or Melquizael Costa versus the winner of Joe Anderson Brito versus Pat Sabatini this weekend. Now, Lupi Godinez put a clinic on Julia Pilastri for the first 2 rounds of that fight. It was good to see her go out there and mix up all elements of her game, the striking, the wrestling. She went out there, got 5 takedowns, landed a good amount of significant strikes, and those first 2 rounds were perfect from Lupi Godinez. Now, in that 3rd round, she definitely gassed. Listen, we're in Mexico City elevation, plus just, the adrenaline and the emotions of fighting in Mexico, coming off 2 back-to-back losses, knowing you need this win, having those first 2 dominant rounds. And Julia Pilastri really put it on Lupi Godinez in that 3rd and final round. Had that been a 5-round fight, you never know how it could have played out. Maybe Julia Pilastri gets a late finish or wins the next 2 rounds and gets a decision. But in a 3-round fight, Lupi clearly got the first 2 rounds, and I'm happy for her. So let's see how they match her up next. Now, Rafa Garcia went out there and beat Vince Pichel via unanimous decision, 230-27, which I was kind of surprised about, because I kind of did think that Vince Pichel won the 2nd round, but apparently the judges didn't. But I definitely think that Rafa got the 1st and the 3rd. Now, Vince Pichel was on Twitter going crazy, acting like he got robbed. He did not get robbed. The only thing that sucks is that they didn't score the 2nd round for him, 2 of the judges, because I clearly thought he won that 2nd round, but the 1st and 3rd, you got to give the Rafa Garcia. Like I said, it was just a workman-like performance where, one guy is just an okay average fighter, but he's taking on kind of a shop-worn fighter. For the average 42-year-old, Vince Pichel looks fantastic, but I'm saying for UFC standards, it's tough to be 42-year-old winning fights at this level. But yeah, shout out to both of them, and good scrap. So Jamal Emmers and Gabriel Miranda had absolute chaos for 4 minutes. The fight starts off and Gabriel Miranda looks like, okay, this guy, he's got 17 wins, 17 finishes. I believe 16 of them are by submission, So this guy goes out there, he takes the back of Jamal Emmers, and it looks like, wow, Gabriel Miranda is about to get another 1st round finish. And as soon as Emmers was able to buck him off, you saw the fight completely leave Gabriel Miranda. And it might have been due to the fact that, he was going balls to the wall, and that air in Mexico is so thin that, He didn't get any time to recover, no space, and from there, Jamal Emmers just put it on him, got 2 knockdowns, and just went out there and destroyed him after the early adversity. And Jamal Emmers, another impressive win. The thing about Jamal Emmers is he's a hot and cold fighter. Sometimes he looks like a future world champion. Other times he leaves you with your head scratching. So we'll see what they do next with Emmers. But I want to see Billy Q versus Gabriel Miranda. That's a fight that was supposed to happen in the past. And I think it's a very intriguing matchup. Just the whole dynamic of Gabriel Miranda being a very potent early finisher and Billy Q being known for dragging people into the depths of hell. So I want to see Billy Q versus Gabriel Miranda. And for Jamal Emmers, let's just wait to see what the matchmakers do, because there's lots of different directions you can go in with him. You could test out a young prospect. You could put him in there with a veteran. Like, there's all kinds of things you can do with Emmers. And last but not least, Markel Medeiros defeated Austin Hubbard via split decision. And it was just a typical Austin harmless Hubbard fight. Man, it's crazy. It's like, so the first round, Medeiros wins. Now the second round, harmless Hubbard goes out there and takes the back of Medeiros, controls him that entire round. It's clearly 1-1 going into the third, right? So it all comes down to that third round. And man, Hubbard looks like he's controlling him early. He gets the takedown. You're on top. You're doing your thing. But as soon as Medeiros showed some urgency to get back up, to create a scramble, then he starts landing some damaging elbows, causes a cut on Austin Hubbard. And that was the only damage of the entire round. So therefore, you win that round. Like, damage over control all day, baby. And although not much happened in that third round, the most meaningful moments of the third round belonged to Markel Medeiros. And as a result, he won the split decision. So shout out to him. Let's see what they do with him next. And for harmless Hubbard, it's crazy how you can win, like 10 minutes of that fight and still not inflict any harm on your opponent. So overall, UFC Mexico was a great event. The Mexican crowd really showed out and were loud. You love to see it. Yo, what was up with London last week, man? That main event was sick between Brady and Leon, and the UK crowd was kind of quiet for their standards. I'm used to the UK crowd being ruckus, man. And the Mexican crowd really, really, really brought it. So shout out to them. Looks like we're not going to have to build y'all in Apex in Mexico, but London, we're gonna have to build y'all in Apex because y'all don't show up early. No, I'm just messing around. But guys, I'm gonna be back later this week to break down Josh Emmett versus Leron Murphy. UFC Vegas is going down this weekend. So Wednesday night, join me and Clint live on Half the Battle to break down that card. And let me know. Give me some comments. Smash the like button. Hit the subscribe. Share if you feel so inclined. Let me know what y'all think. Hit me up on Twitter at Best Fight Picks, on Instagram at Half the Battle Pod, on TikTok at Half the Battle Podcast. Thank you all so much for your support. And until the next time, let's cash these bets.